The distress signal had no voice to it, just a pulse, repeating, coming from the dark between two star systems where nothing was supposed to be. Dara Solis was the third person to pick it up on the steadfast scan board. She was also the first to say they should answer it. That was usually how it went with her. The wreckage was bad. A Drakthari cargo hauler had drifted off course and clipped a Confederacy freighter carrying medical goods and diplomatic personal effects. The freighter had broken in two. The hauler was spinning slowly, venting gas from a split in its hull. There were no voices on the emergency channel, just that pulse. Dara went in with the rescue team. She wore a sealed suit, carried a scanner, and moved through the debris in a line with four others. The inside of the freighter smelled like burned plastic and something sweeter underneath, like heated stone. She did not think about what that smell meant until later. The team found 3 survivors in the first hour. 2 Drakthari crew members, badly injured, pulled into emergency medical pods. One small being of a species Dara didn't recognize, unconscious but breathing. She logged them all and kept moving. It was the scanner that found the egg. It was deep in what had been a private cargo hold, half buried under a collapsed shelf unit. The egg was large, about the size of a carry pack, dark green with faint gold lines running across the shell like cracks filled with light. One end had a real crack in it, thin and jagged, leaking a faint warmth. The scanner said it was alive. Dara lifted it carefully. She did not know what species it was. The thermal readings suggested it needed warmth urgently. She wrapped it in the emergency thermal sheet from her kit, tucked it against her chest, and kept going. That was the job. You found something alive, you kept it alive. The rest was paperwork. The Drakthari rescue fleet arrived while the team was still clearing the outer wreckage. 3 large ships, deep gray, moving with the kind of slow confidence that came from not having to hurry because nothing in range was going to argue with them. Their lead vessel identified itself as the carrier Dominion of Ash. Their commander came through on the channel with a voice like gravel being poured into a metal bowl. His name was Vorak, elder rank. He wanted a full count of the freighter's contents and survivors. Dara gave her report along with the rest of the team. When she mentioned the egg, Vorak went quiet for a moment. Then he said he would meet the team at the transfer point. He was bigger in person. Most Drakthari were big, but Vorak was the kind of big that made a person aware of their own skeleton. He wore no armor. His scales were the gray of deep ocean water, and his eyes were amber, the same color as the lines on the egg. He looked at the egg in Dara's arms with an expression she could not fully read. Something moved behind his eyes and then went still. He said, "Set it down and step away." Dara asked why. He said, "It is ashborn. It carries the hollow flame. Under the law of my people it must be destroyed." She had heard of the hollow flame. Barely. Some Drakthari genetic condition. She did not know what it meant and she said so. Vorak did not explain further. He said the law was the law. He extended one claw, slowly, palm upward, waiting. Dara looked at the egg. The thermal sheet was doing its job. The faint warmth coming through the crack in the shell was steady. She thought about what her scanner had said. Alive. She did not make a speech. She did not argue the law or cite regulations. She was 24 years old and she had not slept in 19 hours and her back hurt from carrying things through a wreck. She just held the egg a little tighter and started walking back toward the steadfast. Vorak said her name, or rather he said cadet, which was close enough. She kept walking. There was a long silence on the channel behind her, the kind of silence that meant people were deciding what kind of moment this was going to be. Nobody stopped her. The rescue team leads were busy with the injured survivors. Vorak's people were spread across 3 ships and a debris field. Nobody was specifically in charge of the transfer point. She walked up the steadfast's boarding ramp, and the door sealed behind her. She stood in the corridor for a moment, holding the egg, feeling her heart going at a pace that had nothing to do with the walk. Then she went to the med bay because it was the warmest room on the ship and set the egg down on the padded bench and sat next to it and breathed. The egg pulsed faintly under her hand, slow and steady. She did not know what she had just done, not in full. She knew she had made a choice and that the choice had a weight to it that would take time to settle. But right now, the weight felt less important than the pulse under her palm. Alive. She could figure out the rest later. The door to Captain Oren Mace's office opened before Dara could knock. He was already looking at her. He was a quiet man, built like someone who had started broad and then spent years compressing himself down through patience. He had been captain of the Steadfast for 11 years, and he had the face of someone who had seen a large number of things go sideways and had personally dealt with most of them. He said, "Close the door." She closed it. He said, "Tell me what happened out there in the order it actually happened." She told him. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at his desk, then at her. "You understand," he said, "that the Drakthari are not a people you walk away from in the middle of a legal order." "It wasn't a legal order," Dara said. "It was a request from one officer to another at an unstructured scene. There was no chain of command covering that moment." "You thought about that quickly." "I thought about it on the walk back." Mace was quiet, then he said, "Where is it now?" "Med Bay. Dr. Oren is watching it. She says the shell crack is stable." He stood up and walked past her without another word. She followed. In the med bay, the egg sat on the padded bench where she had left it, wrapped in a fresh thermal sheet that Dr. Oren had added. Oren was a small woman with precise hands and an expression that said she had opinions she was currently keeping to herself. Mace stood in front of the egg for a long time. The egg moved. Not much, a small shift, a settling, but the crack along the shell had widened slightly, and from inside came a sound. Not loud, a very soft, low hum like a single-held note from something that did not yet have words. Oren said quietly, "It's a fast developer. Drakthari eggs can hatch in under 48 hours when they're close to term. This one is close." Mace looked at the egg hummed. He went back to his office, and Dara followed again. He pulled up the Confederacy Charter on his screen and sat reading it for a while. She stood and waited because she had learned that was what you did with Mace. Eventually he said, "Vorak has already filed a diplomatic grievance. The Confederacy Duty Office flagged it to me an hour ago. He is requesting the immediate return of the egg for what he calls ritual completion." "That means destroying it." "Yes." "And what are they telling you to do?" He said, 3 council members have already contacted the Steadfast directly. They are using the phrase cultural sovereignty. They are using it very quickly and very firmly." He closed the charter screen. "The Grand Accord has a non-interference clause. It is broad and it is old, and it has been used before to hand things back to species who wanted to do things to those things that nobody else liked." Dara said nothing. "I am going to ask you one question," Mace said, "and I need you to think before you answer, not about the law, about what you actually want." She said, "I wanted to live." He nodded slowly. He opened a different screen. He started typing. She watched the heading of the document form at the top and recognized the format. A counter-grievance. Confederacy Statute 9.2, Post-Hatching Sentient Protections. She said, "You said the Accord's non-interference clause was broad." "It is," he said, "but it has an exception. Any being that has completed biological emergence and entered independent sensory function is protected under a separate clause. It is less broad, but it is also law." He kept typing. "If that egg hatches, the legal ground shifts. The Drakthari claim gets harder to enforce. Not impossible, but harder." The egg hatched 31 hours later. It was small, dark-scaled, moving unsteadily on 4 short legs. It had no fire. Oren ran the full biological scan and confirmed it quietly, and Dara sat on the floor of the med bay and let the hatchling press its nose against her wrist, and she felt its breath, warm and dry. It looked at her, black eyes wide open, learning her face. She thought of an old word from her home colony, a word used for strays, for lost animals found in the rain, for children carried in from the cold. Rail. Found one. She said it softly, and the hatchling tilted its head. Mace filed the counter-grievance that evening. 3 more Confederacy Council members sent angry messages. 2 Drakthari warships moved to within communication range of the Steadfast's position. Rail did not know any of this. He pressed against Dara's side and hummed, low and steady, and Dr. Oren looked up from her notes with an expression that said the sound was doing something to her stress levels that she did not fully understand. The political storm was building fast. Rail went asleep curled against Dara's boot and hummed even while sleeping. The station called Ardent had been built at a junction point between 4 trade lanes, which meant it was always loud and always full of people who needed to be somewhere else. Dara arrived on it as a named party in an active Confederacy tribunal case, which meant she was escorted everywhere and allowed to go almost nowhere alone. Her legal advocate was waiting in her assigned quarters. He was tall, gray-skinned, and completely still in the way that the Sarathi were still, like a machine at rest. His name was Asek. He had 4 fingers on each hand and no visible mouth until he opened it to speak, at which point it appeared as a thin horizontal line. He said, "I have reviewed the case. Your chance of a favorable ruling is approximately 5%. Dara said, "Are you trying to make me feel better or worse?" "I am giving you accurate information. I have already begun preparing arguments." She looked at him. "If we have a 5% chance, why are you already working?" "Because," Asik said, "5% is not 0. Rail was kept in a separate holding area during the proceedings, a warm room with padded walls and a clear barrier on one side. He had grown in the weeks since hatching. He was now the size of a large cat, moving confidently on 4 legs, watching everything with those wide black eyes. The tribunal had allowed Dara supervised visits twice a day. The first session of the hearing was held in a round chamber with tiered seating for 15 species representatives. Vorek sat at the Drakthari table like a stone placed there by something very old and very certain. He presented his case without theater. He simply stated facts. The hollow flame was a documented hereditary flaw. The purity mandate had governed Drakthari life for 3,000 years. The Accord's cultural sovereignty clause had been invoked correctly. The hatchling should be returned. He did not call Rail a hatchling. He called it the Ashbourne specimen. Dara was given 5 minutes to speak on her own behalf before the formal arguments began. Asek had prepared something for her. She read it once, set it down, and did not use it. She stood up and said, "He knows my face. When I walk in the room, he comes to the barrier and puts his nose against it. He has learned my name. He says it not clearly, but he says it. He is alive and he is growing and he knows that I am his. That is all I have." The chamber was quiet. One of the council representatives leaned to speak to another. Vorak looked at the table. Asek made a note. That evening, while Dara was in the supervised visit room and Rail was pressing his forehead against the barrier and making low sounds at her, Vorak came to the observation corridor. He did not announce himself. He stood on the other side of the outer glass and watched. Rail did not see him. Dara did not see him. An ardent security officer noted his presence in a log and then said nothing because saying nothing seemed correct. Vorak stood there for almost 10 minutes. Then he walked away. Meanwhile, Asek was 3 floors down in the Arden archive, reading. He was reading very old Drakthari records that had been entered into the Confederacy Historical Database as part of an academic exchange 400 years ago, and then essentially forgotten. What he found made him stop and reread the section twice. 700 years before the purity mandate became law, Ashbourne Drakthari had not been destroyed. They had been documented, studied, kept apart but kept. The records describe their absence of flame, yes, but also something else, a biological output that the old scholars had called the still voice, a harmonic resonance produced in the throat. The scholars had written that the still voice calmed clutchmates during injury, that it had, in recorded cases, caused predators to stop moving. The purity mandate had not discovered a truth, it had replaced one. Osek sent Dara a brief message that night. It said, "I have found something. 5% may have been generous in the wrong direction." She read it twice and decided it meant things were getting better, not worse. The next morning, Rael was brought to the supervised room and Dara sat with him for the full hour. Near the end, he opened his throat and made a sound that was different from his usual hum. Longer, lower, resonant in a way that made the walls seem briefly uncertain. Every monitoring instrument in the room registered a frequency that was not in any Drakthari biological survey on record. The attending tribunal observer wrote in her log, "Subject is not defective. Subject is producing something we do not have a category for." The message came through Osek's secure channel at the 4th hour of a long night, tagged with no name and no origin point. The sender had used 3 different relay nodes to get it there. Whoever they were, they did not want to be found. The message said, "I voted for the law that is killing that child. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 600 years. Read what I am sending you." Osek read everything attached. Then he went to find Dara. The sender was an elder named Sara. She had served on the Drakthari High Council for most of her life and had retired to a border colony 2 decades ago. She was one of the oldest living Drakthari. She had been present, young and ambitious, on the day the purity mandate was written into formal law. She had voted yes along with everyone else because the politics of that moment had required unanimity, and she had not had the courage to be the one voice against it. She had spent 6 centuries carrying that vote. What she sent was not a personal confession, though it read like one underneath. It was documentation. Old biological studies, sealed in a Drakthari archive and never formally released, showing that Ashborn Drakthari had been observed and recorded long before the mandate erased them. The still voice was real. It was physiological. It was measurable. And in the oldest records it was considered a gift. One entry, dated roughly 900 years ago, described a Drakthari battle in which 3 Ashborn were present among the wounded. Their humming had calmed the injured enough that field healers could work. The entry called them the Quiet Ones and said they were valuable. Then the politics changed. Then there was a war, and after the war a leader who needed a symbol of Drakthari purity, and after the symbol there was a law, and after enough generations the law became simply how things were and always had been. Sora could not testify publicly. She told Osek this plainly in a follow-up message. It would fracture the Drakthari Council at a time of internal tension. She was old, not foolish, but she could give him the documents. What he did with them was his business. Osek brought all of this to Dara over cold tea in the station's smallest meeting room. She read everything slowly. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Rael isn't broken." "No," Osek said. "He is something they removed from their own people and then forgot they had removed." Outside, things were not going quietly. 3 Confederacy species had now formally sided with the Drakthari position, citing the precedent danger of overriding cultural law. Captain Mace, who had come to Ardent for the proceedings, was dealing with messages from Confederacy Command that were getting shorter and colder each day. 2 species had sided with Dara. The Sarathi, which surprised nobody since Osek was Sarathi, and the Sarathi tended to move as a body when one of their own was invested. And a small, quiet amphibious species called the Dolhari, who sent a single representative to the station, and had that representative deliver a single prepared statement that said their people had conducted a similar purge 400 years ago, and considered it the greatest shame in their history. The statement was 3 sentences long. It sat in the chamber record like a stone. Rail was now the size of a large dog. He had learned 12 words in Standard. His first had been Dara. His second had been stay. He said both of them often, and the staying was implied. A Confederacy diplomat named Ferris came to see Dara privately. He was polished, careful, and clearly uncomfortable. He offered her a deal: return Rail, receive a formal cultural apology from the Drakthari delegation, and walk away with no mark on her record and no damage to humanity's standing in the Confederacy. She listened to the whole thing. Then she asked what happened to Rail. Ferris paused. He said that would be handled according to Drakthari law. She said no and showed him the door. That night Vorik sent a private request for communication to Elder Sora's colony. Sora declined the connection. She sent a text response instead. It said, "You already know what I would say to you, Vorak. You have known it for a long time." Vorak read it once. He did not respond. He sat in his quarters on the Dominion of Ash with the lights low and the message on his screen until the screen went dark on its own. The jump corridor that connected Ardent Station to the main Confederacy transit lanes was a narrow window in space, the kind of passage that everything large had to go through to leave or arrive quickly. When Vorak positioned 6 Drakthari warships across it, he did not block it entirely. He did not have to. Their presence was the message. The message said, "Think carefully about what you rule." Ardent Station's senior administrator sent 3 formal complaints to the Drakthari fleet. All 3 received polite, technically non-threatening replies that said the vessels were conducting routine position exercises. Nobody in the station believed this. The tribunal sessions continued anyway because stopping them would mean admitting the pressure was working. The Confederacy Council members who had been pushing for a quiet settlement were now pushing loudly. In closed session, 2 of them said outright that one hatchling was not worth a political rupture with the Drakthari. They were not wrong about the math. They were just doing math that left certain things out of the equation. Mace had been sitting in the observer section for most of the proceedings, present but not formally participating. On the 3rd day of the final session, he submitted a request to address the tribunal. This was unusual. He was not legal counsel. The tribunal conferred for a while and then allowed it, giving him 5 minutes under the guest address provision. He stood at the speaker's position and looked at the room. He did not have notes. He said, "I have been running rescue operations for 22 years. I have pulled a lot of things out of wreckage. Some of them survived and some of them didn't. The ones that didn't, you remember. The ones that survived because someone made a fast choice and held on, you also remember." He paused. "We have been in the Confederacy for 40 years. That is not long. Most of you have governments older than humanity's entire history of space travel. I know what we look like to you. Small, new, not fully serious yet. I know some of you think we will grow out of the way we are." He looked at the Drakthari delegation. "One of my crew found a living thing in a wreck and kept it alive because that is what you do when you find something living. You can call that a violation of cultural law. I call it the only decision a person can make and still live with themselves afterward." He sat down. The chamber was quiet in the particular way of rooms where something has landed, and people are not yet sure what it is. During the recess that followed, Rull was brought to the waiting area adjacent to the main corridor. He was walking well now, 4-legged and steady, his dark scales catching the station light. He did not understand why he kept being moved from room to room. He understood warmth and faces and the sound of voices he recognized. Vorik came through the corridor on his way back from the Drakthari delegation room. He did not know Rull would be there. They saw each other through the barrier. Rull went still for a moment, then he opened his throat. The hum was not loud. It was low and long and resonant, the kind of sound that did not so much enter the ears as settle into the chest. Vorik stopped walking. Around him, 2 aides and a security officer all independently felt the tension leave their shoulders without understanding why. Varric stood in front of the barrier for almost 2 minutes. He looked at Rull. Rull looked at him. The hum continued, patient and even. When Varric finally moved again, something in the way he carried himself was different. The aides noticed it and said nothing because they could not name it. That evening, without sending any communication to the tribunal or to Arden administration, Varric recalled the 6 ships from the jump corridor. They moved back to standard holding distance and powered down their forward systems. Dara was in Rull's holding room when she heard. She sat on the floor and Rull put his head on her knee. He hummed softly, the way he did when things were calm. She told him that she had not made the wrong choice. She told him she believed that even now, whatever happened next. He did not understand all the words. He understood enough. He hummed back at her in the way that meant, as best she had ever been able to translate it, that he was not afraid. The ruling came through on a Tuesday, which felt like the wrong day for something that had taken so long. The tribunal delivered it in the main chamber with all parties present. The lead arbitrator read it aloud. It was long and carefully hedged in the way that important rulings are when they are trying not to shatter things while still deciding them. Dara listened to the first 3 paragraphs and could not follow the legal language. Then she heard the words ward stage sentient, and she heard current guardian, and she heard shall remain, and she looked at Usuk. Usuk had the thin-line expression that was, for a Sarotha, the equivalent of a wide smile. Under Confederacy Statute 7.4, any being that had completed biological emergence and achieved independent sensory bonding and basic language acquisition was classified as a ward stage sentient. Cultural claims of origin could not override ward stage protections. Rull was to remain with Dara unless she chose to relinquish guardianship. She did not choose that. The Drekthari delegation filed a formal protest the next morning. It was submitted by Varric himself. It was also the exact minimum protest required by Drekthari Council law, no more detailed than it had to be, with no accompanying demands and no fleet movements. Confederacy observers noted this privately. Several of them wrote memos about it that said nothing conclusive but kept the observation on record. Usuk found Dara in the corridor outside the chamber and said, "You had a 5% chance." She said, "Did you ever actually think we were going to lose?" He considered this with the careful patience of his species. "I thought it was possible," he said finally. "I find that I am glad it did not go that way." Elder Sara, on her border colony, filed a historical document with the Drekthari Public Archive that same week. She did not announce it. She simply submitted it through the standard academic channel and listed it under the heading Old Biological Records, pre-mandate period. It contained everything she had sent Usuk, plus her own account of the day the mandate was voted into law. Nobody read it immediately. These things take time. Captain Muss received a formal reprimand from Confederacy Command for his unsolicited tribunal address. He signed the reprimand acknowledgement, filed it, and went back to running the Steadfast. He mentioned it to no one. Dara accepted a transfer to a research station on her home colony. She had asked for somewhere with open land and clean air and enough space for something that was going to keep growing. She got exactly that. Rull by then was larger than a horse. He moved with the quiet confidence of something that had never been told it was supposed to be afraid. He did not breathe fire. He hummed when strangers came near, a sound that made dogs go calm and made humans unconsciously slow their breathing. He had learned 340 words in standard. He had started listening to Drekthari language recordings on his own, without being asked, sitting very still with his head tilted in the way he had when he was learning something. Dara's mother came to the station in the 3rd month. She walked outside and found Rull in the field behind the main building, looking at the sky. She was a practical woman who had raised 3 children on a frontier colony and had strong opinions about most things. She looked at Rull for a long moment. She asked Dara how big he was going to get. Dara said she didn't know. Her mother nodded as if this was a reasonable answer and went inside. 20 minutes later, she came back out and said that she had set an extra place at the table and that dinner would be ready when the two of them were done standing around outside. That night, Rull stood in the field after dark and opened his throat. The hum went out into the air, long and low, rolling across the open land. In a grazing field 3 kilometers away, a herd of animals went still and then slowly lay down, the way animals do when something has told them without words that everything is all right. The stars were coming out. Rull watched them the way living things watch things they are not afraid of. He was alive, he had been found, he was home.